Welcome to It All Starts Here with realestate.co.nz. Since 1996, even before Google, we've been helping New Zealanders find their perfect property. But this podcast isn't about the sale, it's about what happens after the sold sign comes down, the boxes are unpacked and the houses turn into a home. Because so much starts there.
I wanted to buy a property when I was 28 and I didn't have any money and Gordon lent me, £30,000 to buy my first house, which was, that just got dropped in my bank account, and then I went off and bought myself a lovely flat and could barely afford to pay for it for the first 6 months, and then finally got going and was earning more and doing better in a way, and best thing I ever did. A couple of my property deals have been a bit like that.
Different,
actually.
Yeah. That's extremely kind of him.
Yeah, it was awesome, and I think I paid the money back to him over 3 years, but I worked for him, for 11 years.
You may know Josh Emett as the judge from MasterChef and as the chef behind some of New Zealand's best restaurants. Josh's cooking story started on a rural Waikato farm. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So please take me back to that farm. Where did you grow up and what was it like growing up?
So I grew up in a small place called Ngāhinapōuri, which is sort of on the foothills of Mount Pirongia, which, in the Waikato.
Yeah.
So very, very small farming community. Ngāhinapōuri school had about probably 110 kids, and that's the primary school, I guess, that I went to. And a haupo, which is up the road, about 10 k's up the road, is where my father's parents had farmed and then moved down to Ngāhinapōuri. So in that little area there, we had never really, or Dad's family at least, had never really moved far from there.
I also grew up in a school like that, but our school roll only got as high as 73.
Oh, wow.
So 100 would be big by comparison.
Tiny.
Yeah. And what's your favourite memory from that home?
We grew up in a tiny little house, which was down the road closer to the school, which was almost like the sharemilker's house to my dad's parents, who lived in the house on that farm. So Dad, eventually was running that farm and then purchased his own farm down the road. So the best memory from that house actually was that just outside the farm gate there was this colossal walnut tree, and we used to and sort of, you could climb up into it and sit in the heart of it and just eat walnuts, and that's one of the things that we just constantly did. So that was a rickety old little house, I would call it, a real sharemilker's house. And then we built our own house, or moved into our own house down when Dad got his own farm. And
what sort of things stuck with you from that time of being on the farm?
Well, we moved. When we moved down to that farm, we were beef and sheep farming. Dad planted, I think we had corn and maize for a long time as well. I absolutely adored my growing up on that farm. It was about 350 acres. I spent my whole childhood just roaming the farm. That was our playground. And I absolutely loved that upbringing. One of our boundaries was the Waipa River. So it had sort of 4 boundaries to the farm. One was a creek that fed off the Waipa River. One was the Waipa River, which was amazing. So we would just head down to the river and, as you can imagine, get up to mischief and try and swim it and that sort of thing, and get told off because, worried about drowning and whatnot. And lots of shooting, lots of, eeling, what we called eeling, which is fishing for eels. And just roaming every sort of inch of it. Every gully, that sort of thing. There was an old Māori pa sort of site down on one corner of it, an area called the Peninsula Paddock, which was effectively a peninsula. All the farm paddocks had names, and because you do, so that you can figure out how to move stock around, and it's they're all called different things. And me and my brother mowed cricket pitches on the front lawn and the front paddocks. So we'd have a cricket pitch set up with, so we'd go out there and do that. I have a younger sister as well. And Dad they put in a swimming pool at some point. So we grew up in a swimming pool, so we're all really good swimmers from a very young age as well. We just lived in the pool pretty much most of the year, even winter we sometimes swam. It was just glorious.
There's a lot to be said for that kind of idyllic country life. I had something similar, but I was on the other side of the Waikato.
Yeah.
And the catching eels and just the adventures of being on a farm and the freedom of roaming.
Yeah, it was just so good. We used to come home from school and we had chores every day. We either biked home from school or we bussed home from school. There was a bus route that dropped us down at the bottom of our gate. And then we were just straight into sort of farm life. You would have to go and feed the chooks. You would have to go and chop the wood if wood needed chopping, especially during winter and it was cold. You would go and help feeding out, which is feeding out to the cattle. So loading hay on. Various bits of farm equipment and trailers and that sort of thing, and then sitting on the back of the trailer and actually feeding it out slowly, or sitting on the tractor and steering it while Dad sort of left it idling along. We'd sit there and steer it around in circles while he did that job. Yeah. So it was just glorious.
Yeah, it's very cool. And when you think about the sort of dishes that you serve, is there ever connection back home in that time?
The dishes that I serve now, definitely. I grew up shooting rabbits and ducks and all that sort of thing, and eel and eeling. But I have a huge connection with those sorts of products. I've cooked with them all over the world. And on my menus, when I first started working in London, actually, when I got up to London, I didn't really know what to expect, and we were getting the most incredible, quails from France that came sort of trussed in little blue and white ribbons, French-style ribbons and that sort of thing. Just beautiful products. The eel we were using was actually from Mercer, which is, just down the road, which was really, I always found that really, really interesting. Eels, obviously pie, mash and eel shops in the UK the eel's been quite heavily fished over there, so it's more scarce than it is definitely in New Zealand. I always had rabbit on the menu. We could get beautiful rabbits from France. We would get grouse, partridge from Scotland, wild deer from Scotland. And all of that sort of stuff just was absolute heaven for me. So my cooking naturally migrated to the things that I grew up shooting, but didn't necessarily know how to cook it. I tried when I was, growing up, but I needed help with the skinning and that sort of thing and all the sort of gruesome stuff. But, that's very much been part of how I shaped my cooking. Yeah.
And do you think you've got a bit of a hard work gene that's sort of carried through from growing up on the farm?
Yeah, definitely. I think that my father always said to me, if it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you're the top 5% in your given chosen category job, just be the best at it. And we worked hard on the farm. I think I don't know that we were pushed to work hard, but there was always something to do, and you're expected to pull your weight and do your chores and contribute to the house. That was just, or the farm, it was just the way it was, right? There wasn't room for sort of lying around and doing nothing. And Mum worked incredibly hard, actually. She was a farmer's wife who effectively, I think in her mid-30s went back to university and which was not the done thing back then.
That's amazing.
And studied for almost 10 years and got her doctorate in social science. She was quite intense, I would say, through that period. We used to come home and have to disappear out of the house because we weren't allowed. She was studying. We weren't allowed to make any noise and disrupt her flow. I think it's an interesting conversation chatting to her about that because I don't think I don't think it was favourably looked upon, her going back to university and doing that, and what the hell are you doing, and you should be supporting your husband at home on the farm sort of thing. It felt a bit old-fashioned back then.
At least you had a big playground at which you could go outside and
Yeah,
enjoy.
totally. It was just glorious, and Mum did a lot of cooking actually. Mum's a great cook. She was reasonably adventurous, I would say, with what she cooked. We had a really amazing vegetable patch. As I said, we had chooks, so we had eggs that we had to go out and find. You'd feed the chooks and you would go and collect the eggs and do all that sort of thing. So baking was something that I did from a really young age and came really natural to me. I was hungry, so very hungry. My brother and I, especially, and my sister as well. So I'd bake a huge amount of cakes, which is why I was baking from a very young age, making all sorts of things like pavlovas, banana cakes, slices, everything basically.
But you couldn't buy it back then either, is the difference?
No, we lived about 20 minutes from nearest supermarket, which I think was in Dinsdale at the time, and you'd go there once a week and do a big shop. And there was no lemonade, no biscuits, no all those things. You sort of even more so, I think, as a kid who we didn't even have a dairy in Ngāhinapōuri at that point. There was a dairy originally, and then it closed down and didn't exist anymore. So we used to just crave. I've got a sweet tooth anyway, but that's the sort of stuff we'd crave. But I was able to make whatever I wanted. And eat whatever I wanted if I'd made it. So that's why I made gorgeous banana cakes and then just ate them,
Fair enough.
with a big glass of milk.
Excellent. When you think back to that time, is there anything that you've brought back that impacts how you parent your children today?
Yeah, definitely. I think I do wonder whether we're soft on our, kids or not, and that's parenting's hard as we know. We try and instill in our boys that really hard work ethic. We're really conscious, probably in this day and age, that we have happy boys. That their happiness is probably our biggest priority. That we're feeling like they're understand life but enjoy life. We do we scrap every night about who's doing the dishwasher like any normal family, and who's cleaning up after the table, and make your bed and do this and do that and pick up your towel and whatever else, all of those things. And I think boys, brains just work differently. They do. Young boys' brains, they take a while to switch on, I think,
they do.
To those sorts of things. But I've used things like golf as a sport, which I play a lot with my kids, which I've used that to instill a lot of good behaviour, because there's so many great rules in a sport like that. It's very much a sport that has old school values, and it's quite interesting. We've just watched the World Cup, and there was so much behaviour. Sort of Louis turned around to me and said, I just football's really doing my head in. I don't like how they behave on the pitch. He sort of said, well, golf's not like that. People don't behave like that in golf. They don't sort of, throw themselves on the ground and sort of effectively cheat, or it's like you just don't do that. There's certain things in how you behave. So it's things like that with bringing up boys, I think, that have been really good for them.
Yeah. And I hear at 7 you used to enjoy cooking eggs for yourself for breakfast.
Oh my God, yeah.
Is that still your go-to?
I do. Oh my God. Well, funnily enough, I had my breakfast this morning was was going to have 4 eggs, and Helen stole one, so I had 3 and a piece of toast. But I grew up having 4 eggs on toast pretty much every morning, and there were some mornings I'd do 4 eggs on toast and then do another 4 eggs on toast. 4 eggs on 4 bits of white toast, good old-fashioned in the toaster. Sometimes bacon, sometimes sausages, because we always had lots of meat and sausages in the house. Being a beef and sheep farm, we had a big chest freezer that was always full of all sorts, from home kill and that sort of thing. I used to get up and make my own breakfast and be really reasonably self-sufficient, and we've definitely passed that on to Finn and Louis. They're quite active in getting up and cooking for themselves. Louis makes extraordinary eggs. He's been making them for years now.
Been well taught.
Great poached eggs, great fried, great omelettes, great scrambled. The works.
Can you tell me about your first job, which I understand went past your house on a boat, maybe?
Oh yeah, one of my first jobs. Well, one of my first jobs was a place called Wilson Carlisle Rest Home, which I got when I was 15 years old.
Oh wow!
Which was a really good job, quite a tightly held job in our little hood, and it was a friend of ours, family, who the two of the daughters were working there, and my brother got a job there and was interviewed by the matron, who was like the scariest woman you've ever come across, having to go in there and be interviewed by her, very strict, and we got both of us got jobs in the kitchen, so we used to work there 2 hours after school, like from 5 to 7, and serve dinner to what we called, I used to call serve dinner to the old ladies, but they were a group of ladies in 3 different villas, 10 in each, and we'd take a trolley down and serve them dinner, and then clean up after dinner and chat and have lots of fun. It was a really good job, and a really high paying job. Comparative to friends who were doing paper runs and getting pittance, the old paper run was just a terrible job. So I did really well out of that. And then I worked on the, I'd been in kitchens for a few years, washing dishes, etc., and serving food, and then got a job on the Waipa Delta, which was the floating restaurant.
I remember it from the Waikato.
Yeah, it was just a gorgeous old riverboat that, floated up and down. And we had a house on the river. At this point, when I was 13, we moved into town, sold the farm, much to our horror, and started living in town. And that was one of my first jobs, which was, I look back, and the chef who I worked under, and I was effectively just making, again, I think we made the pavlovas, or we bought the pavlovas, and then we decorated them with fruit and did nice decorations, and carved ham and roast beef and all that sort of really old school stuff. Terrible little kitchen on the back of the boat. Used to wave to my mum sitting out the back peeling potatoes.
How funny. And thinking back to the farm, is that where the sort of idea to become a chef came from, or was it from working? Yeah,
I don't think I ever at that point wanted to be a chef, although when you look back in my for my 13th birthday, my grandparents bought me a cookbook. The radio and television New Zealand cookbook, which was this gorgeous old, quite a big cookbook. And I think I was probably a little bit perplexed when I got that for my 13th birthday. Well, teenage Joshua gets a cookbook. Yeah. But it was, they obviously knew something I didn't at that point. They knew I loved cooking, so they got me something like that, and I already was. It probably that explains it, right? I was clearly showing signs that I was that was something I enjoyed. I didn't actually I wanted to work outdoors. Growing up on a farm, I definitely didn't want to. I knew I didn't want to wear a suit. I had that sort of in my head. I don't want to wear a suit to work. Although I liked, I love dressing up and like wearing nice clothes and whatever else. It wasn't ever about that. I just felt like that wasn't me. I felt like I wanted to do something creative. And it naturally sort of flowed into cooking. I think what happened was that we were considering my options, and we got out a polytechnic chart, and I had messed around at school for a few years at this point. In fact, that's an understatement. I looked at the chart and looked at my marks that I had achieved through 5th and 6th form, and I literally qualified for nothing apart from catering school. So we sort of that's how we narrowed it down, and I applied for catering school. We had a friend who was running that hospitality unit, so we probably got a bit of a leg up because I definitely needed help at that point, and I got into catering, Waikato Polytechnic, and away I went.
That's incredible. Now you've moved around a lot, and how do you manage children as you're making all of those moves with the sort of young family and keeping things still a home?
Well, we have moved around a lot. I mean, I met Helen, my wife, in New York, and we had our first child there in New Jersey. He was actually born in New Jersey. We had purchased a house in New Jersey while I was still working for Gordon Ramsay, and had been working for him for about 10 years at that point. Helen was working for Merrill Lynch, I think she was pregnant when the GFC hit, and she worked on one of the top floors of one of the Merrill Lynch buildings in downtown New York, and literally just watched it empty out.
Oh my gosh.
We had a whole lot of friends in Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, and because that was our world, right? They were some of my biggest regulars through the restaurant, not to mention friends, and so that was a really interesting time. And we decided to leave New York, so we did a stint for Gordon in Australia. We had another baby there, which was less expected. That just sort of happened, maybe an accident in the afternoon or whatever you want to call it. And so we ended up having two young children, and then the following few years we ended up moving back to the UK because that's it's actually where all our belongings. Our home was packed up in New Jersey. We had rented that house. So we were sending everything, was literally on a container on the way back to the UK. So we finished with Gordon Ramsay at that point after 11 years. Dad was back in New Zealand and had cancer and was had about 3 months to live. And it was terminal, so we moved back to New Zealand, spent time in the family home with Dad until he passed away, and then followed our belongings back to the UK. So it was two young kids. It was a tumultuous sort of 6 months that, and I did a bit of work in the UK for a while, but over that period of time, we probably moved, lived in about 14 or 15 different houses over about a 3-year period, and it was chaotic. One for a small period of time, which was in Surbiton in the UK, where South London, where Helen grew up. And then eventually settled back in New Zealand because I was doing MasterChef New Zealand, working really hard down here. I'd opened Rata, which is a restaurant in Queenstown, which I did with a business partner, so we were a bit more settled here. And then we moved into the house that we're still currently in. This is about 15 years ago now. We rented that house off a lovely guy called Mark. And eventually bought that house off him.
That's awesome.
Because we didn't want to leave.
And so what does home mean to you now?
Well, home's everything. We love the house that we're in. We actually, every now and then, we talk about what do we need. I don't think we need bigger because, our boys are growing up now. That home has been a real, it's a beautiful, quiet property. It's on a quiet road, but very close to the beach. We loved it from the moment we sort of moved in. It's an old shop or two old shops, so it's very boxy and unusual. It's like living in a big apartment. We couldn't figure out. We actually dealt directly with Mark when we purchased the house off him, and we couldn't figure out a price, and actually we didn't have enough money to pay for it at that point either. So he lent us money to buy it off him. And
it's pretty unique.
Very unique. And we did that deal we were having phone calls with him, and we said, listen, why don't you just come around and we'll just sit down and figure this out. So he came over to the house. We cracked a bottle of champagne and we sat there and figured it out so that it would work for both parties. So we couldn't agree on the price, so we said, well, you lend us that and we'll, and that's how it went.
That's awesome.
And that reminds me actually that when I didn't have any money, and when I was working in London, I was living in flats and just tripping around, but I wanted to buy a property when I was 28 there. and I didn't have any money, and Gordon lent me, £30,000 to buy my first house, which was, that just got dropped in my bank account, and then I went off and bought myself a lovely flat, and could barely afford to pay for it for the first 6 months, and then finally got going and was earning more and doing better in a way, and best thing I ever did. So a couple of my property deals have been a bit like that.
A bit different,
actually.
yeah. That's extremely kind of him.
Yeah, it was awesome, and I hopefully I thanked him properly, and I definitely thanked him at the time. I think I paid the money back to him over 3 years, but I worked for him. I worked for him for 11 years, so I spent a lot of time with Gordon, and it was a really generous thing to do.
Can you just talk us through your time in London and some of the adventures you had?
Oh, London was just glorious. I think I loved London back then. I moved there when I was probably 19 years old. I spent my whole I lived, it wasn't a straight line. I lived there for 2 years. I went back to Australia for 3 years because my visa ran out. Then I went back, worked on super yachts for 3 months to get myself enough money to get back into London, and then went back into London. And then I had a really good, solid, probably 5 or 6 year stint back in London. That was all with Gordon before I moved to New York with him. But my working life in London was just Mayfair, so I sort of, as a young chef, you end up, living in some pretty average little dingy flats and that sort of thing in London, but my work life was in these super elite, highly luxurious restaurants in Mayfair, with people sort of pouring through the door, and so it's a complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So I loved that, and I spent I knew Mayfair like the back of my hand. Sort of I grew up in there, had a lot of fun.
And tell me, what was your first day like in Gordon Ramsay's kitchen?
Oh, pretty brutal. I had an interview with Gordon. I came off super yachts, and the guy Donovan, who I was working with in Australia, sent me up and said, "Go and you should go and work for Gordon." So I got an interview with him. Had an interview. Didn't discuss anything. Didn't discuss money or anything like that. I just said, "Can I get a job?" "Yeah, you can get a job. Start Monday. Where have you been working?" I think he knew that if I'd been working with Donovan for 3 years, I could pretty much survive anything, because Donovan was a very, very hard man. And rolled into the kitchen. He sort of said to me, "Come at 8 o'clock on Monday morning." And when I walked in at 8 o'clock, the chefs had already been there 2 hours. And one of them was like, "What the hell are you doing turning up at this time of the morning?" He's actually said it worse than that. But anyway, that was what that kitchen was like. It was absolutely brutal.
And looking back at your time in London and buying your first flat, if you could give yourself some advice back on that time, what do you think it would be?
Don't buy the wrong paint colour for your flat and then paint it. I thought, oh, right, I'll paint my flat. I'll paint it myself. So I went out and bought this paint and didn't make much of a choice. Didn't ask anyone advice. And then I painted my whole front lounge, and I was like, oh my God, I've just painted it sort of yellow. It was not a nice cream or not a nice colour whatsoever. It was just bloody yellow. So I literally went straight back to the shop, bought and put another layer over the top of it, which was more of a white. I was sort of just absolutely ashamed that I had gone and done that. But I would seriously encourage people to just get themselves on the property market. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted a home somewhere that, and I didn't care how much I had to suffer. Of course I could barely afford a fridge, let alone a sofa, and the 50-year-old green carpet and the terrible wallpaper and all that sort of stuff that when you buy an old flat. I think there was an old lady who had been living in it and had owned it for years before me. So it was a gorgeous flat in a gorgeous old mansions block, 1-bedroom flat. But it needed a bit of work, and of course that costs money, but you just suffer through and slowly buy yourself a bed. All I really needed was a bed, to be honest.
It sounds like working pretty hard.
I could deal with the mauve bath and a sink in the bathroom, but Yeah, I always felt like there's if you where there's a will, there's a way, and that's how it happened. I said, I think I had the conversation with Gordon. I want to buy a flat. I haven't got any money, and that's how we got there.
That's awesome. And when you think about like homes you've had and you've renovated kitchens, because obviously the kitchen element must be big for you. Is there any kind of memory that you could talk about around a kitchen you've put in that you just like, that was my favourite?
Well, our current house, our kitchen is just unbelievable. It's we work with Sub-Zero Wolf, which is just the most incredible products, and we invested a huge amount of money in our kitchen. All the cabinetry and the layout and all that sort of thing. So our current, that's why we can't move out of that house, because our kitchen is just still spectacular. It's got great wine fridge. It's very well laid out. 2 dishwashers, which we seem to still only use one, I think 80% of the time, and the other one gets a bit of overflow, and you can tell that by the usage of them. But yeah, we absolutely loved that house. We did a full reno on it about 6 or 7 years ago, and it's a great house. It's an unusual house. I sometimes wonder it'll be hard to sell, but the right person will come along and fall in love with it. Our house that we owned in New Jersey, because Helen and I bought a house, speaking of money transfers and that sort of thing, Helen and I had known each other about 3 months, and met and dated in New York, and then she had just sold a flat in London. I still owned a flat in London, so we decided we were going to buy a house. She transferred all the money into my bank account, and then I purchased the house under our names, but that was the way we did the transaction. So we bought a house in New Jersey, which was a sort of French colonial place, which was 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms. They don't build small houses in America.
No, they don't. Yeah, especially in New Jersey.
And it had a authentic prohibition bar in the basement.
Oh wow!
Like a properly hammered bar that had a really good workout. Okay. Room for flappers to change who were dancers and that sort of thing. It was just amazing. And hidden behind cupboards, a little lock where you open the cupboards and there were shelves behind them for all the booze. That was a very cool house. We lived in there for about 2 years. We owned it for about 8, but we only ever lived in it for about 2 years.
Oh wow, that sounds very cool. And if you won Lotto tomorrow, what sort of property would you buy?
If I won Lotto tomorrow, I struggle to fix a location where I would really, really love to spend the rest of my life. I know that it's a really good question. It's either going to be somewhere like Palm Springs in the desert, with a beautiful sort of old mid-century style of a house, that is really tranquil and got space. And I need space. I think I want lawn, and I want at least 4-car garaging. I don't like houses that are actually too big. From a practicality, you just end up walking too far. It's like a kitchen that's too big. It's just, and
no
upstairs, downstairs doesn't really do it for me either. I love single level where you can roam, but houses I don't think there's that many good houses out there. Houses that are really beautiful and livable. You go into houses and they're big and beautiful and all that sort of thing, but I think some of them are just so hard to live in. So it needs to be compact enough that you're not going to get lost in it, and it feels really cozy. And the friends, if you have friends or family who have houses like that are just so easy to live in, and you feel good in the different spaces, and that's really hard. I think that's a really hard thing from a design point of view. Otherwise, I just bugger off and live in a castle in France, which I'd absolutely love to do.
That would be a lot of fun.
The castles in France are just there's a lot of them on sale, that's for sure. And, I would just love to do that. That would be my...
Yeah, to renovate.
Yeah, to renovate, and the gardens and the, just the history and and decorating. I love antiques and old furniture and things that are need to return to a good home. I enjoy shopping for things like that. The stately manor feels quite good, doesn't it?
Yeah, sounds like some good options.
without the big dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us and spending some time with us today. I particularly loved just understanding the farm, your sort of upbringing on the farm, and having eaten one of your restaurants in Onslow recently, I can absolutely see that kind of influence of just how you bring that New Zealand cuisine to life. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for your time.
It's been great to chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to It All Starts Here. Join us next time for another guest and another story that started at home.